You know, we see headlines pop up every single day, and they usually feel like these separate, isolated events. But what happens if you pause and you look at everything that happened on just one day all across the globe? Well, that's what we're doing today. We're connecting the dots of September 8th, 2025 to see how a government collapse in Paris and a resignation in Tokyo might actually have a very real connection to your wallet and a whole lot more. So, let's get into it.
On this single day, it felt like the pillars of stability were just trembling. From the highest offices of government to the trading floors of the stock exchange, the message was coming through loud and clear. The old rules, they might not apply anymore.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this day of disruption, we're going to follow the chain reaction. We'll start with the big political shockwaves. Then we'll track how the money reacts to it. And finally, we'll zoom in on these powerful human stories that really remind us what's at stake in all of this.
First up, politics. Seriously, on September 8th, it really felt like watching a line of dominoes just tipping over, one after the other. And it was creating this massive wave of uncertainty that washed over the entire international stage. The first big political earthquake of the day hit Paris. And it was a vote that was, well, nothing short of a landslide. Prime Minister François Bayrou's government was completely ousted in a no-confidence vote. I mean, just look at these numbers. They tell you everything you need to know. A crushing 364 lawmakers voted against him, with only 194 in favor.
And to put that into perspective, because this is key, this wasn't just some one-off political drama. For President Macron, this meant he had to find a fifth prime minister in less than 2 years. I mean, wow. That kind of turnover signals some deep systemic instability in one of Europe's biggest powers.
But here's the thing, France wasn't alone. This feeling of instability was spreading. Just the day before, Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba had resigned. Then, on this exact same day, France's government collapses. And at the very same time, Norway's election was so close it was balanced on a knife's edge. All of a sudden, you start to see a pattern emerging, right? You've got these major nations all facing these huge leadership crises at the exact same moment.
So all of this political chaos, it naturally leads to a really crucial question. When the political world gets this shaky, what on earth happens to our money? What happens when politics spooks the entire global economy?
Well, the answer to that question came almost instantly on the world's trading floors. Because if there's one thing markets absolutely hate, it's uncertainty. And on this day, the economic ripple effects from all that political chaos were just impossible to ignore.
Let's just break down how everyone reacted. So, in Japan, the PM's resignation immediately threw the country's whole fiscal policy into question. Over in France, the government's collapse sparked these really serious concerns about the stability of the entire Eurozone. And then you jump across the Atlantic, and the US markets were already nervous because of a weak jobs report, which just made all this global anxiety feel so much worse.
And all that anxiety, all that whispering among traders and economists, it kind of boiled down to this one number, 0.5%. Speculation was suddenly running wild that the US Federal Reserve would be forced to make a pretty big interest rate cut just to try and calm everyone down. It's a perfect example of how connected we all are. Political moves in Tokyo and Paris could literally force a major economic policy change in Washington.
But you know, while governments and markets are dealing with this huge global picture, the real impact of all this instability is always felt on the ground, by real people. So to see that, let's shift focus to two stories from Australia. On the surface, they seem completely unrelated, but both of them really speak to a world that's trying to deal with unpredictability.
The headlines in Sydney that day were just dominated by this sudden, awful tragedy. An experienced surfer was killed in a shark attack, and a witness, who was clearly struggling to even process what they saw, captured the horror of it with just 2 words: really dramatic. Sometimes it's the simplest words that are the most haunting, isn't it?
And this wasn't just some random event, it was a real shock to the city. The victim was 57-year-old Mercury Pisalakis. And this incident was actually Sydney's first fatal shark attack in 3 years, which was just the stark reminder of that unpredictable, sometimes terrifying intersection between our lives and the natural world.
Elsewhere in Australia, a totally different kind of drama was playing out inside a courtroom. A woman named Erin Patterson was sentenced for poisoning multiple people. The sentence was incredibly severe, life in prison with absolutely no possibility of parole for 33 years. But look at that last row. This was also a huge legal landmark. It was the first time a sentencing had ever been broadcast live in the state of Victoria, basically bringing the process of justice out from behind closed doors and right into the public view.
Okay, for our final piece of this puzzle, let's talk about one of the most powerful forces that's shaping literally all of these stories, technology. Because on September 8th, we saw two very different sides of its role in our world. One side that connects us, and another that can spark deadly, deadly conflict.
In Kathmandu, the government made a decision to ban social media platforms, and it triggered these massive, violent protests. The consequences were just devastating. At least 19 people were killed, and hundreds more were injured. The situation got so bad that the country's home minister was actually forced to resign. It's just a tragic, horrifying example of what can happen when people's access to the digital world is suddenly cut off.
Now here is the most stunning, mind-bending irony of the entire day. While people were literally dying in the streets of Nepal over a social media ban, the rest of the world was observing International Literacy Day. And you want to know what the official theme was for 2025? Digital inclusion. The contrast is it's staggering. So after this day of collapsing governments, of volatile markets, and of real human tragedy and triumph, we're left with this really fundamental question. In a world that feels like it's defined by constant overlapping disruption, how do we, as individuals and as a whole society, even begin to find our footing, to build our own sense of stability?